questions? Councillor Walker?
Yeah, really not so much a question, but an observation, and that is that this is, I mean, this study is obviously taking a rather limited view. It's not looking, for example, at carbon costs, emission costs, wider costs. So I just put that on the table, and I accept that. It is apparent that as you go further out on the face of it, you've got higher costs, and obviously you're going to have costs around sustainability and carbon costs associated with that. So that's an assumption you can make, but it's only an assumption.
Okay. I think that's probably relevant to our next item as we try and look at that in a slightly more joined up way into the future. So good point. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, would you like to move this and I'll second?
You move, I'll second.
Either or, it's moved and seconded. Look, I think this is a real good first cut, and I appreciate this coming before us.
This is not the first cut.
Another speaking turn, Councillor Quicks? No?
Quicks is just a little bit
Got a side
busy with the press. Councillor
If this is
Quicks?
the first cut we've got, I could write that press release for you. But anyway, no,
just chatting to Councillor Day.
It is a good document for us to have. It is overdue, and it is here before us now, and it may not cover all the ground. But I tell you what, I don't think it would cover all the ground anyway. We're never going to satisfy every member around this table in terms of the content of such a report. But look, whichever way you look at it, upside down, diagonally, horizontally, it's expensive in the greenfields areas. It's expensive, full stop, expensive. And what it doesn't go into the whole of life costs. And if you go into that, when you build, and as I've said in the past, you've got those opening day costs, and then you've got the whole of life costs. A building is supposed to last 50, 80 years under the Building Act. Those costs of locating in greenfields go on and on and on. They are lived and sucked up every day by those that end up there. And they are the enormous costs that many find themselves almost impossible to get themselves out of. And the cost of transport to remote communities is just exhausting for most families. So Councillor Quicks refers to some cost savings of buying on day one, and maybe you manage to get relieved of that mortgage on year 10 possibly, but it's from year 5 to 50. Those costs of remoteness carry on and on and on. And I think the next report would probably look at that, and I would welcome that. But at this time, I think we can look at this report and say, we are destining people to enormous costs in greenfields area. We are offering them significantly lesser cost in brownfields area. And that's the individuals that end up there, and it's all Aucklanders who subsidise greenfields, and to a lesser extent subsidise brownfields. We've got to remember that going forward with our SHA decision making.
Thank you, Councillor, and we need to remember it going forward as we look at our unitary plan and our density rules too. Any other questions? I've got Councillor Webster, Brewer speaking to the recommendation. Webster, Brewer and, sorry, someone over here, and Cashmore.
Me too. Is it questions or? No, the questions.
Either or.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Just one question actually. Presumably it was Millwater you looked at, but on the thing the Silverdale one you had up there, you said low density, but it's greater than 1,000. Would you call Millwater low density?
Through Madam Chair, it'd be like single house on a site though, or something of that nature.
Okay. And I hear what Councillor Darby said, and however, you know, I come back to the fact that, you know, you've talked about these legacy councils adopting different service levels, and the cost of, I think you said, trying to find it, in the north. But I mean, did you look at the fact that we used to work with different developers to get such a lot of infrastructure already in? I mean, the problem we've run into in the west is because the plan changes that were put together were not followed through to get the infrastructure that was needed.
Through Madam Chair, that's one of the matters that the report highlights on page 9, is that each of the legacy councils had different ways of operating, so that would have impacted on the study results as well, Councillor Webster.
But I mean,
particularly with infrastructure
I suppose
agreement.
what I'm struggling with is you know, being able to do greenfields with the developers doing the infrastructure has to be better than trying to do the infrastructure ourselves. That's where the cost comes in.
That's right.
And that's what I struggle with. I mean, I've read the report backwards and forwards, and you seem to be saying, well, you know, greenfields is bad because we have to pay for the infrastructure.
Doesn't say that.
We're not actually bringing into account that the infrastructure can be actually done by the developers.
They're all up costs.
I think there's different, and
Yeah.
Andrew might like to comment on this, Madam
Andrew's
Chair.
heard me on this before,
With the,
ad nauseum.
so there's infrastructure that the developers always do under the RMA, and then there's the infrastructure that the council eventually has responsibility for, whether we pay Fulton Hogan's to build it or whether the developer pays Fulton Hogan to build it. The council ends up with it's on its books. It'll get paid for with development contributions, generally. And that then is an operating cost for us over time. So it's a cost of development in greenfields. I think as Councillor Quacks pointed out, I mean, there's development costs in greenfields might be easier than digging up suburban road, but there's also a chunk of the other infrastructure we may have to invest in to support greenfields development because you've got a longer trip into the city. So it's those costs have an effect. Now the study, as Councillor Quaxon pointed out, suggests that these things do differ on a site-specific basis, and I imagine that's in looking at where we would encourage development to proceed. The unitary plan reflects that and has a balance of both brownfields and greenfields development, trying to take into account the areas where, in both cases, it's going to be the best value to encourage growth to occur.
Member Galmanet?
It's kind of a question, but it might be a statement too, I'm not sure. Was there any kind of consideration in the framework of the study to the particular nuances or needs of Papakainga development?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, not in particular, but the principles would apply in terms of the findings, because it was more of a city-wide nature as opposed to the idea that we were trying to identify unique circumstances. So if Papakainga was more highly intensified, such as Ngāti Whātua or Rorake might be undertaking, or if it was a more low density at a different location, those principles would still apply in terms of the costings of infrastructure.
Right, it's certainly something that IMSB is interested in. We may well undertake a bit of work on that.
Yes, through Madam Chair, there is a separate work stream we're initiating on Papakainga housing under the Housing Action Plan as well.
Good.
Councillor Cashmore.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Reid. A complicated piece of work, because in this basket of fruit, there's no two pieces of fruit the same. And it's and also how much of a piece of infrastructure is future-proofed, and how do we phase that in and phase that out? Very interesting. And a couple of these have your say things. You know, down in Papakura, there were 2 people who drove up to Albany every day to work. And when I was up in Albany on Saturday, there were 4 people who drove down to the airport every day to work.
Yeah.
So it's amazing when you come into the city each morning and leave each night, the actual easy part's in the centre. It's when you get to the outsides, it's complicated. So people choose to live where they wish, and that makes Reed's job harder too, because apartments and terrace housing may be part of our future, but there is still an aspiration for many people to have that bit of space. And those aspirations will change as people go through their life track. One of the key components is where the employment's going to be. Not everybody works in the city. People work all over the place. It's becoming increasingly diverse. And one of the things we know in the south is we're going to see huge employment growth down there. You know, Puanui, Drury South, potentially Glenbrook. There's another changing dynamic which will change the transport ops and the costs around these projects. So thank you, Ree, and your team for the start work here. Don't envy you having to put it together, because there are a lot of moving parts in it. And as Councillor Darby said, it is a moving feast, and another study further down the track we'll be interested to see, and also interested to see some benchmarking, how we compare with others.
Okay. Councillor Bruin, Councillor Casey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To me, what I get out of this is the fact that we heard during 2013 particularly, and the fight over residential intensification versus greenfields, and that was the huge cost of greenfields development. And even I'm Googling frantically now, but my speaking terms come up too quick. Even how we consulted the public over the draft unitary plan, that was put out there as a fact from memory, that greenfield development was more expensive than more central infill brownfields development. And the takeout I get from this report, Madam Chair, is that top line observation is that overall, yes, providing infrastructure services to greenfields is generally more expensive, quote, but however the case study analysis highlights the considerable variation, and I know that officers have talked to us about that and how that is part of their thinking. And so I suppose this is, for me, this is some good evidential material that doesn't completely vindicate the claims that were made, black and white, and no one dared argue against them, that greenfields was always going to be more expensive when you're rolling out roads, rolling out footpaths, rolling out water, wastewater to the other side of the city. And in no better case is this, is that when you look at the summary of infrastructure costs by density and assets, and you look at stone fields, you know, in the old Auckland city area there, that supposedly, when you factor in wastewater, water, stormwater, transport, is more expensive as a high density development per dwelling than building medium density in Weymouth. And that certainly does not match the rhetoric and the spin when we were debating versus residential versus greenfields, brownfields versus greenfields. The impression was always given that Weymouth, development in Weymouth would be far more expensive than Stonefields, where economies of scale could be achieved and where existing infrastructure around that central isthmus location would have already existed. And so for me, the top line is this, is that yes, there is a general trend that overall it's more expensive north, more expensive south, but west per dwelling comes in cheaper than central, and there is huge variation depending on the density, depending on the location, and hence why greenfields development, SHAs and other suburban and regional development can certainly happen on good merit at a good cost-benefit ratio. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Casey.
I always thought that there was going to be a school in the CBD, and that was it, the Ministry of Education was planning for that. But I noticed when reading through about the Sugar Tree development, there was nothing tagged.
Oh, Madam Chair, I can't respond to that. I don't have the information at hand. Your question, Councillor Casey?
That there was always, I've heard discussions about a school for the CBD.
Yeah, I don't think, Councillor, we're not actually talking about the individual.
Sugar Tree was one of the case studies, and it hasn't got anything listed next to education.
No, Madam Chair, the reason Sugar Tree would have been mentioned is just as a higher density development as one type of housing type in a inner city location, not because there was tagged to a school or anything of that nature. At one stage, community facilities and the costings were contemplated to be part of the study, but it was found too difficult in terms of getting all of those costings, and for some of those services, such as regional health services like hospitals, they serve such a wider catchment, so that wasn't really incorporated into the study itself as well. So there are some limitations to the study, and those limitations are noted.
Yeah, I think that is one of the limitations, is the sections on the community facilities, libraries and health services. But it's good to get it started.
Madam Chair. Just looking at the report, I mean, I'm a little bit concerned. It's sort of I hear what Councillor Brewer says about evidential based, and so that's all good. But I'm a little bit concerned that it can turn into a tool that says why not to do things, rather than a tool that can enable to do things. So I just want to flag that up, that even though I accept that the report itself is based on the evidential facts that's available, I'm pretty keen to ensure that the report isn't used in a negative sense in terms of saying, well, and this was sort of hearing the discussion about greenfields and that and development of those, I'd rather not see it be as a tool to say, well, that's why we shouldn't do these things. I'm more interested in about hopefully the council using it as a tool to provide to opportunities to do more things at greenfields. So I'm just saying, is there an opportunity that could do that?
Madam Chair, I think this study is just one element that helps to inform decision making going forward. There are many elements that are taken into account when you make your decision. So the unitary plan would have taken into account, for example, a whole range of environmental considerations, people's preferences, the submissions that people made to the unitary plan, all of those sorts of things. The issues around costs are a component of that, and this report just tries to understand those a little bit better, as I said, originally to help our financial policy and our asset management planning.
So the reason I say, Madam Chair, is because Māori land is out in the outers, and if it's going to be inhibited from development and opportunity around this type of information, that is a massive concern for me.
Yes, you, Madam Chair, but decisions have already been made by this council to
Right.
allow, for example,
the Auckland plan.
Papakainga zonings to have some form of residential development, and so they have taken into account wider perspectives, and that's exactly what I was just saying.
Yep. No, that's clear, and I think the point that's being made is let's just exercise a bit of caution in how this is bandied around.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I've got Councillor Quacks, and then
Just
I
a-
think we're
just
ready
a-
for recommendations.
Just a question, and in relation to the question that I asked, question 4, and Andrew, this is probably for you, the average trips from the city fringe may cost 4 times more than those near the CBD. If we're not taking private costs into account, why has that been emphasised? Is that a cost to council, or is that a cost to the private individual?
Well, if you're further away from the city, that's going to add to the congestion on the motorway network, and if we want to respond to that and improve transport times, then the council would have to make a greater investment in capital, and the council would also need to then maintain that capital over time. So that's a public cost that we may or may not incur, and you can see that in the debate about the expanded transport program. As far as the private costs go, then the house buyer will take those into account. So Councillor Cashmore's example of the bloke who works in Albany and lives in Franklin, in Papakura, he's obviously decided I'll have maybe a bigger house on a bigger section in Papakura than I can afford in Mount Eden. But the cost to me of doing that is I've got to drive all the way to Albany. So people will take their own private costs into account in the decision making. I mean, I see a part of the organisation's role reflected in the unitary plan and how we set our development contributions and other charges. That reflects the public costs to some extent, and part of the externalities.
Yeah, because the reason why this is a matter that's quite often raised, and yet only 13% of people work in the CBD. So this assumption is always being made that you're travelling to the CBD. Well, for example, for my ward in Howick, only 8% of people travel to the CBD to work. 92% of them work within Howick, or they go to Penrose, or they go to the airport, or they go to Highbrook, or they go to East Tamaki, or they work from home.
So I don't work with the transport models, but I'm pretty sure and confident that our transport planners, when they're modelling the traffic flows and the transport flows, and therefore looking at how growth will affect that and what we need to invest, that they are taking that into account, where the flows are going within Howick, across the city, into the CBD and back. And their modelling reflects that. That then drives the planning that they bring to you for the investments they're proposing to make. So that should be in, that will be in there, and that reflects the advice on what the investment plans for the city's transport should be. That will then flow through to things like DCs.
Okay, thank you.
I think we've exhausted the questions. I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you all.